everyone. Good afternoon. Running a little behind. Want to get the party started? All right, so we can just start with our welcoming and introductions. Let's start on this side and we'll walk around the room.
Is Ron Carr, Homeless Coalition?
Elliot Robinson, Homeless Coalition. Rafael Hernandez, Monterey Economic Partnership.
Lawrence Suansupa, sitting in for Laura Medina for Monterey County Department of Social Services.
Elsa Jimenez, Monterey County Health Department.
Kurt Shockey, Veterans Transition Center.
Janet Schaefer, Dan Baldwin from the Foundation.
David Jacob, City of Seaside.
Nick Erickson, representing the faith community.
Dana Cleary, CHISPA.
Don Smith, Monterey County Office of Ed, Homeless Services Coordinator.
Cheryl County Family Resource Center, serving our homeless and foster youth of Salinas City Elementary School District.
Kirk Mann, Housing Authority, County of Monterey.
Joe Gunter, Mayor of Salinas.
Michael Barr, Mayor of King City.
All right, we'll jump back this way. Officer.
Gabe Carvey, currently assigned to the homeless outreach team at Salinas.
Awesome.
Then your name again?
Roman Pettis from CISO.
Gina Alvarez with CC. Erica Barker with Assemblymember Mark Stone's office.
Hi, I'm Jessica at Chinatown Wellness Center.
Hi, I'm Jackie Smith at CSUMB Chinatown Wellness Center.
That leads CSUMB.
Barbara Mitchell, Interim.
Anastasia Wyatt, County of Monterey.
Gloria de la Rosa, City of Salinas. I sit on the Housing Subcommittee meeting in the city.
Patricia Zeruni, Monterey County Health Department, Whole Person Care. Megan Hunter, City of Salinas. Tina LaPearl, City of Salinas.
CJ Valenzuela, City of Salinas.
Glorietta Rowling, Department of Social Services, Community Action.
Doug, a homeless activist.
Michael Bass, member of the public.
Okay, go back this way now.
Hi, my name is Tyler Pigeon. I'm with Well Sky.
Alexa Johnson, Housing Resource Center.
Stacey Ozeba Perkins, new Executive Director for Gathering for Women.
Nicole Sakihara,
Roxanne Wilson from the Homeless Coalition.
Brian Wainwright, Program Director of BTC.
Marianne Lee Canary, Gathering for Women.
Pamela Weston, Access Ambassador, NorCal, NHA, and also Stakeholders Advisory Committee.
Very well. Wes White, Salinas, President of Salinas Homeless Union.
And cameraman. All right, we're going to go to additional modifications to agenda. Elliot, anything?
Just to point out that Dan Baldwin has designated Janet Schaefer as our alternate. We're, as designated for the
Okay, noted for the record. We're going to go to public comments for anything not on the agenda. Anything not on the agenda? Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Pamela Weston, Chairman, and all of those of you that are working towards ending homelessness and displacement. There's a way that we do things, and I have lived experience. For those that can't make it, I'm grateful and thankful. It's supposed to be a 10-year plan to end homelessness, but it's not about having a home, it's about who we are and how we live. So as we work on funding and missions of the CESH and the other grants, I thank you that where we were before with city council and county, we didn't know each other, but today we work with relationships. My hope today is that we deal with that homeless outreach team that begins with us, that stops talking about us without us, and that as stakeholders, Alejo, as that you came to a Methodist church and said you would do whatever was necessary, that we look where that we put things at. It begins with doing things with people like me. We spoke, we stood, but there's some of us that didn't make it. Some of us that died along the way. For mothers that can't know where their children are, I asked that there be efforts to outcome. So to bring us back 5 years ago, I asked that as the board of directors directed people to do, that you work along with the stakeholders advisory committee process and not think that there's leadership without relationship, and that you will look again to us to do what is necessary. Because a leader doesn't speak, they teach and they reach people. And in dealing with the new plan, it deals with a standard that the federal and state can only do things different. With the people that we reach to and the whole person care that people got assigned to, they were able to know the difference. When you've lost something, you don't know what's possible because there's not ever been anything done, and the grand jury looked at things. Where was the effort to outcome? When you say that there was one more thing, the people you didn't see, and you said that you reduced homeless, It's because that they're invisible right now, but if you
Thank you.
realize.
We've got 2 minutes only, but we're gonna talk about the point in time council. We have.
But I was speaking about the experience, if that basically you can't see what you don't live, and that the census is not correct.
Thank you. Wes, you got comments?
Of course. How did you guess?
2 minutes.
So I'm really big on organized space, you know, trash, pee, poo, and food in this place. Keep the rats away, keep health and safety standards high. If that, I would wish that this body would make some kind of recommendation where if people could pass a muster of some kind of health and safety standard, then they could be left alone and passed over for a sweep. And if there was a body that actually said that was a possibility, all kinds of people follow any kind of rule you want to put on it. 70–90% of people will follow it no matter what you tell them. Even if it's wrong and messed up, they will do it. You know, just to stay on the good side, just to survive and be where they're at. And if you pass that over while we're looking for sites where they can go to be sanctioned transition encampments, then you know that's what we need to do. If they're signed up on the continuum of care, they should be given a pass. You know, if they can pass muster of this health and safety stuff. I don't see why we're not trying, because what we're looking for is you know, a little bit of cramped, uncomfortable space for a few, but a lot of persecution for many. And that's not any kind of balance. If we've got 2% of people being housed and the other 3,000 people still outdoors, and we're prosecuting and chasing them down, taking everything they got, that's not going to help anything. That's only makes people more messed up in the head. You know, you're talking about post-traumatic stress. One night, 2 weeks, it's a completely different person. You know, and it shouldn't happen. I just became homeless, so I'm living in a guy's living room right now, which is better than being outside. But I'm scared to death of y'all, because I feel like that's what's going to happen to me. I'll be swept up, and it's not helping. So, and I see my friends dying in the street because we keep on taking everything they got, telling them they're not allowed to be anywhere but on the sidewalk where it's more dangerous. We need to allow for people to be somewhere, and if you don't like them where they're at, then open up a spot. You know,
Thank you, sir.
It needs to happen.
Thank you. Anyone else on items not on today's agenda? Yes, Doug.
Doug, being West are homeless out of this. We've been at this for a while. I want to know, where is the permanent shelter of the problem to us? What's going on with it? What's happening? You can build a bridge in Big Sur in 8 months, right? But you can't save lives and take care of people and build a permanent homeless shelter. We have over 9,000 plus homeless children in Monterey County. We rank #1 in the state of California. This is shameful. What are you doing about this?
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Okay. Now we're going to move on. We're going to go to consent item number 8. It's July 31st leadership minutes. We have a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Mayor Gunter. Second. Any comments on this? See none. All those in favor? Aye. Those against? Abstentions? Okay. Motion carries unanimously. Going to consider, second item, consider California Emergency Solutions Housing CESH program funding. Megan, please. This one.
So thank you for giving me some time to go over our recommendations. Thank you. Okay, as I think many on the Leadership Council remember, the City of Salinas is actually the administrative entity. You authorized us to be the administrative entity for the California Emergency Solutions and Housing Grant, Round 1. And so what I'm going to go over is kind of what the rating and ranking recommendations were for funding the applications. Just to give you a little bit of a timeline, the HGD NOFA was published a year ago, and the city submitted its application in late September a year ago. We did receive an award letter in January, but HGD, we were waiting for quite a while to get a standard agreement, which we didn't get until July. So we did execute our standard agreement that will enable us to actually spend the dollars. We had the city publish the NOFA for the funding in April. We had a workshop. The application deadline was May 13th, and we went through the city rating and ranking, first written ranking, and then we did interviews between May and July of this past year. So here are our recommendations. Just to let you know, when we did apply for the funding, as you may recall, we had the funding basically in 4 buckets: rental assistance and housing relocation and stabilization services, flexible housing subsidy, and operating support for emergency housing intervention, including navigation centers and street outreach. And then we set aside $50,000 to do a comprehensive update of the Benito plan. And as you may recall, we did come before the Leadership Council to share our notice of funding availability and get authorization to submit it. And as we explained at that time, we wanted to use funding specifically for a pilot program in Chinatown in the downtown. And we picked that area because it is the largest concentration of chronically homeless in the region. And we felt like if we could pilot something successful and really make a difference on homelessness and apply it to a targeted area, we could actually expand these best practices to the rest of Monterey County. We used the administration funds to bring on board Tina LaPearl. Many of you know her, who's serving as the CESH program manager. The important thing, one thing that happened as we were working towards this program was the Chinatown Health Services Center was no longer able to continue due to funding, loss of funding. And so that really changed kind of what we were thinking, and we really needed to figure out how can we reopen not only the Chinatown Health Center, but we had been talking about the need for a place for people to go from the streets to some type of structured housing and then into permanent housing. So we really wanted to see how these services kind of work together, how the emergency intervention of a shelter would work together with housing navigation, street outreach, and some of these subsidies. And that really informed a lot of the recommendations that you'll see moving forward. So unfortunately, we had a lot of requests that we have limited funding, and a lot of people applied for Activity 3 bucket, which is kind of the emergency shelter intervention. The amount of funding, cash available funding, was just under $400,000. The amount of requests were more than triple that, over $1.2 million. In the other activities, Activity 1 and 2, the amount, there was only one organization, which was CESH, that applied for those activities. And so those areas, we had actual requests that were less than the funding available for those categories. So as I mentioned, the factors and considerations that led us to our recommendations was that we had way more requests for the emergency interventions than what we had available. We have more flexibility in the grant requirements for funding to swapping activities of 1 and 2. They can be interchanged based upon the needs. So we did reach out to HUD about technical assistance, 2 direct applicants to achieve our pilot program outcomes. And as I mentioned, the Chinatown Health Center closed and the housing vouchers are not as forthcoming. So one opportunity that popped up that also you're going to see reflected in our recommendations is thanks to Monterey County and Public Health Department, we are looking at matching whole person care with our CESH funds, which will open a whole new opportunity for us. So you're going to see two recommendations. One, if we are able to match the whole person care funding, and another if we cannot. So as you can see, our funding recommendations are this. We would fund CESL for activity 1 and 2. We would fund, one thing I didn't mention is consistent with how we've treated San Benito County, we would carve out funds in the CESH dollars for San Benito, which is $150,000. We only have one application for San Benito, which we're proposing to fund them at $150,000, which is the Community Homeless Solutions shelter in San Benito County. And then we would propose to use $260,000 of funding for the Chinatown Navigation Center. We're calling it Navigation and Wellness Center, to open that up with the first phase to be bathrooms and then navigation services. And so that's if there's no whole person care, that would be our funding recommendation. And you can see what those items are. Again, $150,000 for community homeless solutions for the support of emergency shelter, $260,000 for the Chinatown Navigation Center, and $515,921 for CESL, because they're the one applicant that applied for funding in those activities. We're asking actually if the Leadership Council can adopt two funding recommendations. One is if we're not able to match up with whole person care. If we can match up with whole person care, the great thing is we can almost double our funding, because those eligible activities we can match with whole person care. So if we are able to do that, our alternative recommendations include, again, San Benito for $150,000, Community Homeless Solutions for the Navigation Center at $204,000, Central Coast Center for Independent Living at $515,921, and then we would fund Interim Inc. For street outreach, wellness engagement, and bridge referral for housing placement at $55,272. And the one thing I just wanted to show, these closely follow the ranking as a result of the rating and ranking system. So we're actually funding in those categories that I mentioned. So we're funding the top 3 funding applications. One thing that we decided to do, because we had so many requests under the emergency shelter bucket, we actually decided to modify some of the percentages to get closer to the 40% cap in activity 3. And so we will have to go back to HCD and get these kind of percentages in these activities modified, and you can see what the change is from what they were previously to what they would be under our funding recommendations. And then, next steps, obviously, Leadership Council action today, and hopefully approving the 2 funding recommendations, one with whole person care, and one if we don't get whole person care. We would work with Monterey County Health Department, who's been very gracious to see how we can really use these funds and put them to work. So we would work out the kinks of how we have to administer, make sure we're able to use these match funds. We would be issuing award letters and executing funding agreements, and then working to get CARS and HMIS set up for this process.
Okay, good. Open up for questions now. Questions, people? Anybody? Board members? board members first, and we'll go.
Could you briefly describe the 40% maximum under activity 3? There's a little note under the description that it can only be a maximum of 40% of the grant.
So the grant funding for that activity 3, which is emergency shelter type interventions, navigation centers, we can only use up to 40% of that whole amount of money for that purpose, which I think we're almost maximizing. We're like 0.1% from what the grant maximum is in that category.
Other questions from the board? Board first? Okay, no, board, then we'll go to Doug. And we'll
I'm on board with it.
yeah, now.
Okay. My question is that the health center was providing showers, clean needle exchange programs, health. There was numerous things going on with that health center. I mean, you got all kinds of money sitting on that board there. Why can't you refund that health center, reopen it again?
Well, that's what we're proposing to do.
Because Dorothy's Place cannot handle all those people in Chinatown around the community. It cannot. That health center was a vital, I know for a fact that health center was a vital structure for those people.
So what we're proposing...
It's just shameful that that health center shut down.
Okay, if you can answer the question.
We agree. The city did not have the funding to, and cash was not available. Cash is limited. The reason why we're able to reopen the Chinatown, we're calling it the Navigation Center and Wellness Center, is because under cash, we can use it for navigation services. So the center will be open. First phase is to open it for bathrooms and showers, and the city actually is providing some funding to do that. But that hygiene services alone do not qualify for the cash funding, only housing navigation. So what the proposal of phase 2 of the Chinatown Navigation and Wellness Center is to create a navigation center that would house up to 15 people who would then be able to get case management services, housing navigation services. And at the same time, we would be able to open the bathrooms and the showers for folks in Chinatown. So it's kind of a best of both worlds, so to speak, because we'll be able to open some of those services and have shelter for up to 15 people.
Okay, any questions?
Ms. Center and Anastasia and Ms. Laporte. When you talk about Navigation Center and rating and ranking, could you please describe for the Leadership Council underneath the mission and due diligence that we have to end homelessness and not just deal with 15 people? Underneath the mission for this being a pilot, what do you foresee the Navigation Center will become as far as will it be a full service partner center, or what does exactly Navigation Center mean, and Wellness Center? And will you be utilizing peer navigators, or what will you do? Could you expound so that we're not just listening to terms, but could you describe why that it was proved so that as we can apply in the future for federal and state funding, what Navigation and Wellness Center means in ending homelessness and doing it different than the way it's been done by Franciscan workers.
Yeah, so I can start, and then I probably want Tina and maybe Anastasia to chime in, but the idea of cash, now when we lost the Chinatown Health Center, we knew there was an emergency that we needed to figure out a way to operate it. But we knew it had to be different, operated differently. Like I said, there needed to be a housing kind of component to it. So what we envision is that the Chinatown Navigation and Wellness Center will work in conjunction with the other cash recipients, which is CESH and Interim, for the street outreach and the housing navigation support. And what the housing navigation would be essentially is we would have 15 folks that would have individualized plans on how they're going to move from homelessness to housing. And there would be a group of people assigned to them in terms of housing navigation, how are they going to get housing, but we would also have housing locators who would actually identify places where they could go. So we also anticipate, because it's whole person care of, looking at the layers of case management and other health and mental health services that would be needed. And I could have, and the 15, the idea is that their individualized cases would determine how long they would stay there. But our goal is not to have people stay there forever, 15 people. Our goal is to kind of cycle people in and out into permanent housing. And I don't know if Tina wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to the piece that Pam mentioned about working with folks with lived experience, present and former. So one of the things that I spoke with Community Homeless Solutions, which I hope this gets approved, and they can run the center, is to start up with a peer advisory council, because in the past there's been access issues to shelters. They aren't low barrier enough. For example, people can't bring pets. Some people like to go into shelters in groups or pairs that know each other. And so there's, that piece. So another thing is, as far as folks who have former lived experience, is we are looking for the opportunity to hire peers for street outreach and for ongoing support. And that's something that I'm encouraging the sub-recipients that are awarded to do. And I do believe that the Homeless Coalition might be doing that as well. So I feel optimistic about all of that. And I look forward to this being a success so we can replicate it 15 and then 15 and then 15 and then 15.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, and if we give a short answer, we've got a lot of people on the agenda.
Good. Yeah. All right. Well, so we're certainly looking to provide for 15 people. I was wondering how long that funding was going to last for this navigation thing. And then what do we do with the other 200 people in Chinatown, as well as the other 2,000 people in Salinas?
Well, just to be real quick, I think the 15 are, again, we will work with 15, we help place 15, then we move on to 15 more. And we realize it's a little at a time, but that's how it's a huge issue. There's not a lot of resources, so it's, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So we're taking it 15 people, working with 15 people at a time.
Well, we don't like to eat elephants, but
yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? She's asking for 2 recommendations. One with whole person care, and the alternative, if it's not, it's without, if that's not approved. So we got the 2 options. We got a motion to approve. Motion by Mayor LeBert, second by Mayor Gunter. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Are those against? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you for your presentation. Moving on to the next item. Consider housing and urban development continuum of care application ranking and review recommendations.
Okay.
Mr. Robinson.
Let's start on the left. So as many of you know, the continuum of care, kind of its initial foundation is around the
Excuse me, if we could focus attention on Elliot, because it's okay, multiple conversations.
The Continuum of Care Leadership Council was originally, or not originally, but when the Leadership Council was formed, it was around the Continuum of Care application process, and then with state funding, our role was growing. But this Continuum of Care funding has been pretty much at the core of what we've been doing for many years. It's an annual competition. The process from HUD, basically, they give us an allocation, which is our annual renewal amount, or our annual renewal demand. And, so I'm going to just start on the summary for a bit. Our annual renewal demand is $1,786,579, which is the amount of funding we receive from HUD in the current year. What HUD then does is they take away roughly 6% and said you have to compete for that 6%. So the first tier 1 is essentially just shy of $1.7 million. That funding in tier 1 is pretty much assured. It's not, it's not 100% assured, but it's pretty much assured that Tier 1 projects usually are funded. In order to get competition and to make sure that we are actually doing our diligence in just not funding the same old, but putting in real criteria for ranking and reviewing. They would take away 6% of the funds and say that's in Tier 2. And that's $107,193 in Tier 2. And then finally, they also put a bonus amount in there so that we can have a bonus project if it is selected by HUD. And in the permanent supportive housing bonus category, there's $111,262. So Tier 1 and Tier 2 combined is $1.786 million, which is our annual renewal demand, and there's another $111,262 in the permanent supportive housing category. We convened a rank and review panel, I want to say last week before, it's very recently. All our partners went through the process of developing a competitive application from the NOFA. We also reviewed their performance at HMIS. And then the panel gives them all a ranking. When the rank and review came out, I'm going to go through them really quickly. At the top was Moongate Plaza. This is a permanent supportive housing project which is going to be opening shortly. So it's master leasing 7 to 8 units, serving 8 individuals annually with a full array of supportive services. Let's see, one page. There's a sold at street housing community. It's an 81 studio units, 4 1-bedroom, 5 2-bedroom units of affordable housing. Through bonus funding, 5 studio units will be utilized to serve chronically homeless households and will support those with mental illness or physical disability. Mid-Penn resident services will offer strength-based case care management services on site, and the project is located in Chinatown. So that scored 1. Next, interim Sandy Shores projects scored 2. Oops, that provides 28 units of permanent, affordable, and supportive group housing for homeless adults with serious mental illnesses. It offers a variety of services aimed at increasing self-sufficiency, educational and vocational services focused on social living, interpersonal study and job skills, linkages to other services and services providers also. It also provides linkages to other service providers. I'm going to won't speak faster and get down the descriptions. Next is the Permanent Supportive Housing Bonus Project, and that's from the Veterans Transition Center, and that's to provide 22 single permanent supportive housing beds that serve homeless veterans with HUD VASH vouchers. So just to say, that's in Tier 1. If it's selected as the bonus project, comes out of Tier 1, and leaves us more money for the project that we're straddling that I'll get to later. If it's not selected, it's still in Tier 1 and is likely to get funded as a Tier 1 project. So we really want for HUD to select that project as a bonus project, so we can increase our HUD in the future year and have more flexibility to keep planning. 4th is interim shelter plus care 2. That project is also permanent supportive housing for persons with mental illness disabilities. The program provides mental health services to clients and intensive case management. Next, at number 5, is in terms of the COPE program, which is master leasing of 7 to 8 units serving 8 individuals annually. The supportive services include the full array of case management and other wraparound services. Next is the County of San Benito's, their Helping Hands project. That's 11 1-, 2-, and 3-bedroom apartments leased by Health and Human Services and subleased to qualified families and individuals. Services include case management based on specific disability, mental and substance abuse counseling, medical and dental assistance, and job training. Next is Safe Passages by Community Human Services. It's a 6-bed transitional supportive housing program serving homeless youth ages 18 to 21. The supportive services include self-sufficiency planning, case management, life skills education, financial literacy, job and educational readiness, and community-wide information and referral. Next is Community Homeless Solutions Homeward Bound Program, that's has 25 two-bedroom units serving homeless or single women with children who are victims of domestic violence. It's located in Marina, and services are provided to families countywide. Next, still in Tier 1, is Community Homeless Solutions Most Lexington Court Program. That's 6 two-bedroom units for homeless families. Supportive services include self-sufficiency, planning, case management, life skills education, financial literacy, and job/educational readiness, and community-wide information and referral. While it's located in Marina, it's also a county-wide program. Next is Community Homeless Solutions Men in Transition Program. That's 24-bed, 8-unit transitional housing project serving single homeless men and women. Supportive services include case management, group counseling, financial literacy, job readiness, life skills, and community-wide information and referral. Then next, the last program in Tier 1 is the Veterans Transition Center Coming Home Program. That's 40 units for homeless veterans and their families. Services include reintegration, full case management, life skills, substance abuse, and substance abuse counseling. It's located in Marina, but it's a county-wide, Monterey and San Benito county-wide program. Finally, the Straddle program is the Housing Authority's partnership with Sun Street Centers, that's Pueblo Del Mar. That's a 54-household program, 2 bedrooms in each household, so it's a 216-bed transitional supportive housing program for homeless families with children in recovery from substance abuse. Supportive services include addiction recovery groups, case management, employment, education, counseling, etc. It's located in Marina, but it's a county-wide program that serves approximately 216 people annually. So Pueblo Del Mar is a straddle program. And so that what means is part of it's in Tier 1. The rest of it is in Tier 2. So if the permanent supportive housing program that the Veterans Transition Center proposed is selected, then $267,681 of Pueblo Del Mar is in Tier 1. And the balance of $107,193 is in Tier 2. If the bonus project is not selected, then the straddle switches to $156,419 in Tier 1 and $218,455 in Tier 2. And I just want to say, Pueblo Del Mar does fill a unique niche in our community around both substance abuse recovery and in family unification programs. The HUD ranking tool, that we've implemented, really does look at permanent supportive housing as a priority, and it also looks at utilization of units. So you can see in front of you the recommendations 1 through 12, and at this point I can...
Okay, questions? Questions, anybody? Board members first? Seeing none, community members? Yes?
It wasn't clear that there was a bonus project that the COC could do aside from domestic violence. And looking at the NOFA here, the only bonus projects that are mentioned are domestic violence ones. So I'm unclear as to how that was ranked.
There are 2 different types of bonuses. There is about $250,000 for domestic violence and exactly $111,262 for a COC bonus. I'm not sure what part of the NOFA you're looking at, but if you want, I can show it to you.
And that's what's being allocated is $111,000.
Yeah, BTC asked for the full amount, and they're the only ones who went for it.
Okay.
And nobody I just want to say nobody responded to our reach out for the domestic violence bonus.
Yeah, I was just rereading the NOFA, and as I was sitting here, and so I would like to see where that was. So that will only serve new chronically homeless individuals who have a disability. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll definitely show it to you, Barbara.
Okay. Yeah, because I can't find it in the NOFA where it discusses anything except domestic violence ones. There's some of that transfer of transitional to permanent, which is what I mistakenly thought that's what it was.
Other questions?
Just one other additional question. If that is not funded, does that leave more money for Pueblo Del Mar?
No, it would keep its slot, and Pueblo Del Mar would lose more money.
It would lose more money?
Yes.
If it's not funded?
Yeah, if it's not selected as a bonus project, HUD will allow it to keep its position on our ranking. Pueblo Del Mar would lose 2/3 of its money.
Okay. Has there been, I know Kirk is sitting here, maybe he can mention something about this, but, looking at the viability of continued operation of Pueblo Del Mar, I don't represent Pueblo Del Mar here, just as a interested coalition member, though. I am concerned about the potential loss of this resource in our community.
Do you want me to comment? One thing that we're looking at is the permanent supportive housing. So that's one thing I'm working on this next fiscal year, is to get the verbiage on the land that we can be permanent versus transitional housing.
And what would happen in the period that it wasn't funded? Because if this is not refunded, then you'd have at least a year period to, you'd have to reapply.
I'm not sure.
If I could chime in, I made a bit about my hat of coalition, I had a screen member, but saying it would be of value, just because I'm putting on my old hat in child welfare. Pueblo Del Mar was a very useful resource to support reunification, and I know in past conversations with the health department, it's also kind of a very, very special resource in terms of substance abuse recovery. And it would be valuable also to discuss kind of when we find out the results of this, if there are other funding opportunities that we can kind of arrange with partners.
Good. Other questions? Comments? Okay. Yes,
Here's one.
So it's regarding the funding for Pueblo Del Mar, you mentioned that if the CESH bonus project was selected, Pueblo Del Mar would lose 1/3 of their money?
If it was selected from HUD, they'll pick it out of the ranking, and then Pueblo Del Mar would move up. But still about 1/3 of their money would be at risk.
Okay, so according to the document you've given us, it doesn't show that. It shows that basically the same amount, it's just switching what categories those money come from. So it looks like 374 on both.
So their ranking is for 374. They're in the list. When you're straddling, if you look at the section below, it says Pueblo Del Mar amount in Tier 1. If PSH bonus project is selected by HUD, you can see that there's 267, 681 in Tier 1. Go down to the next section. It will say Pueblo Del Mar amounts in Tier 1 if PSH bonus project is not selected. And there you can see the number in Tier 1 is less, it's 156,000.
Correct, but Tier 1 and Tier 2 end up being the same money in each scenario.
But Tier 1 is guaranteed funding?
Yes.
Okay,
Tier
so
2 is not.
that's
Right?
right.
Is that
Yeah, the
correct?
threshold is
That's it.
Yeah.
It's not, it's almost guaranteed.
Almost.
It's
Almost.
Tier 2 is not as guaranteed.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Question over.
And as far as like levels of services and types of services and how that you rate and review things and dealing with continuum of care and the integration, basically in the decisions that you made dealing with interim and Pueblo Del Mar, are you able to show specifically the changes now that the funding would do with the funding that you're getting and being able to help stabilize, and especially for women, there's not very many services. For families, there's not many services. For the criteria of having to deal with disabilities and like schizophrenia and bipolar, what's going to be different now with what that we choose, and especially with Pueblo Del Mar versus a veteran, if there's no other place that really does this work, how are we going to be competitive in having them straddle?
So, I mean, every program on this list is a high-value program, and is very important. It's kind of principle number 1. And something, principle number 2, is going to be in Tier 2. And when the panel looked at the performance outcomes and the criteria that HUD also expects of us to use as a high-performing COC, this is how the ranking fell out. Pueblo Del Mar is a very valuable program. Many of my partners in the county know that, the sincerity of my belief there. On the other hand, every single program here is valuable, and something's going to fall into tier 2. The fact that it's in tier 2 doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get funded. It just means its funding has a greater level of risk than the programs in tier 1. There are some things in our collaborative application, we'll get to some of them later, that I hope actually put us in a more competitive mode. We've been working around the clock just about updating a number of our policies and processes and analytics. And also even here, you can see a focus on permanent supportive housing, which is what will help our overall collaborative application. What we want to do is be in a position to put forward a strong, what's called the collaborative application, which is the whole application we put forward, so that we do get tier 2 funding. And one of the points that, again, we'll get to later in the homeless census, the decline in the census is not good for certain state funding categories, but it does put us into a high-performing mode for the federal funding categories. So, given that dynamic, and also given the dynamic that HUD in the past has been more likely to fund straddle programs than programs that stand alone in tier 2, I'm not despondent yet. I may have to eat my words. I don't want to make any commitments, but Pueblo Del Mar is a straddle program. I do suspect our.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna keep this going. We got a few more questions, but we got other other big items. So yes.
Could I just very briefly, I think this is being mischaracterized a little bit in some of the wider comments. The ranking is the ranking, period. The funding is a separate issue. This bonus project is competing only with funded bonus projects. It's not competing against all the others. If it's added in, the coalition goes from about 1.8 to about 1.9 in future years. So VTC is not competing against Pueblo Del Mar. It's competing alone as a bonus project. If that is awarded, the money goes into the pot for use later. So,
although if it's not awarded, this is
right.
It isn't.
If it's not,
it isn't a tier 1 project.
Correct.
Other questions, comments? Okay, there's a recommendation to approve these almost $1.7 million in grant funding. Is there a motion to approve? Motion. Moved, second. All those in favor? Aye. Those against? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Robertson. Now we're moving to consider the updates of the Continuum of Care policies regarding cars, the VAWA emergency transfer, and also the HMIS.
Yes, and Roxanne will soon be coming back.
Yeah, I'll just talk about it briefly. So there's a couple of things that key components that policies that were missing from our coordinated entry. Policies and procedures, one of them really speaks to VAWA. When VAWA has the most recent version of VAWA passed in 2017, there are laws about moving people who are victimized at their unit, and we needed to incorporate that into our policies. And that's the majority of the VAWA policy. It's just saying if someone's victimized, they can identify with their landlord or their program manager, and they would be prioritized against anyone else on the master list for us to relocate them. And that is a part of the VAWA law. And then the second policy addendum that we added was really just verbiage that talks about how we prioritize rapidly rehousing families and chronically homeless individuals. We do by virtue of the master list and how we select clients for housing, but we just needed to put it in words. So it aligns our policies to, and again, like Elliot was saying, it puts us in a more competitive position because we have it in writing. So those are the two policy addendums that we added to coordinated entry, also known as CARS. And then we had also updated the HMIS policies and procedures to include VAWA language and also to talk about how victims of domestic violence can opt out of being entered into HMIS or have their information locked down so other agencies can't see their information. So it's just aligning us with the law.
Thank you for doing that work, updating our policies. Questions now on this, comments? Board members and members of the public? Seeing none, we need just a motion to approve these changes. Moved by Mayor Rivera, second. By council member. All those in favor? Aye. All those against? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. We're now down to 2019 homeless point in time census presentation. This is an item we want to have a further discussion. This came before the Board of Supervisors, and we had sent out a press release. We as a board just didn't have a chance to have a discussion and go over some significant changes that happened since 2017. But we know that there was going to be, we need more time here to talk as a board about some of the findings.
So, there are really two presentations because when we work with ASR, we separate out San Benito and Monterey County, although the total numbers are kind of important to know. So before I get into the whole homeless census, I just want to say Monterey County's census declined by 14.6%. Went from 2,837 in 2017 to 2,422 in 2019. In San Benito, the count went from 520 in 2017 to 283 in 2019. That's a 46.3% decline. Combined, because as a continuum of care, we combine the numbers, although we separate them out because we have two different political jurisdictions that like to understand the numbers for their own jurisdictions. Combined, we went from 3,364 to 2,705, which is a 19.6 decline. As you know, the shelter count starts, the PIT starts with a shelter count the night before, so we know who's in the shelter that night. During the day, there is volunteers are deployed throughout the county. They do a street count. It's a visual count. It's not an in-person count. Later in the afternoon, there's a youth count. And there's also work done with the school districts to work on who in the school districts meet the HUD definition of homelessness as opposed to the McKinney-Vento homelessness. And that actually then ASR does some work to deduplicate numbers. And finally, we conduct a survey in 2 to 3 weeks following the census in the Monterey County side so that we can have more information about our homeless populations. So I'm going to just go through the Monterey County bit really quickly. You can see the longitudinal trend there in the upper left corner where it goes up and down. 2019 went down. You can see the accommodations per night and where people are staying. What's not on there is I think 9% of the population was staying in facilities not fit for human habitation. That number probably is coming from the schools where they know where people are living in places that are like in sheds that aren't fit for human population. 24% of the Monterey County population was sheltered, 70%, 6% unsheltered. You can see the breakdown of populations. Chronically homeless, 562 individuals. Veterans, 172 individuals. Families, 156 families with 596 members. And unaccompanied children and transitional age youth. The gender breakdown, 65% male, 35% female. The age breakdown is actually, there's something significant that's not in this chart that struck me personally. It doesn't have the 51 plus population, and I have not committed the number to memory, but the population 51 or older went from about 35% of the population to roughly 50% of the population. So we've seen a growth of the older population experiencing homelessness. Sexual orientation, you can see that. Race, you can see that. I just want to point out one other thing that we're doing with our collaborative application that where race comes up significant is we're trying to begin a process to understand racial disparities within our census numbers. And it is clear, and one thing that jumps out at me is the overrepresentation of African Americans in the census. There, an African American was, if you take a baseline number, this is kind of weird methodology, so I apologize, but if you take a baseline number as a white person and say, how does it differ from that baseline numbers across different populations? The African American population was 12.5%, 12.5 times more likely to be represented in the homeless population. And we're continuing to do some work in that, and maybe it's the whole racial disparity conversation in some community, and that's for a future meeting if that's of interest to the Leadership Council. First episode of homelessness was at 55% of the respondents said the episode of homelessness that they were experiencing then was their first episode of homelessness. That percent experiencing first time homelessness was also a percentage that was up significantly. Other numbers are roughly similar. Residents prior to homelessness, you can see most people are from our community of Monterey County where this takes place. You can see the length of time. 10% reflected that they've been in foster care at some point of time. That's not necessarily recently, but that they have experienced the foster care system at some point in time. And 18% of the survey's respondents responded they spent one or more night in jail, prison, or juvenile in the past year. I want to just speak a little bit to the primary event or condition that led to homelessness. The top left hand, or the middle left hand corner, you can see 59% reflected that financial issues was the primary reason for homelessness. That percentage also increased significantly. You can see that the employment and unemployment status, I think, is also quite interesting. 18% of our population is currently employed. Of the 82% that are unemployed, 32% are unable to work, 48% are looking for work, and 20% are not working. So that just, to me, just hopefully a human analysis of our population, that most of the homeless population is, in fact, looking to be self-sufficient. Services and assistance. I don't think I want to go over this in any great detail unless people have questions, but 61% of survey respondents reported receiving government assistance. A large number, 39%, report that they are not receiving government assistance, and you can see the reasons. They never applied. Not having a permanent address is a barrier. Paperwork is too difficult. No ID. 18% don't think they're eligible, and 17% don't want government assistance. I would always encourage people to apply for public assistance. Whether they believe they're eligible or not, the social services will determine eligibility. Health conditions, 58% of the population reported having at least one disabling health condition, and across the top, you can see that the largest two are depression and alcoholism.
Can I ask you a question? So that was an interesting statistic to me because on the one where it showed the reason of homelessness, 59% was financial, they don't seem to match up with, I know it's self-reported health, but we're seeing huge numbers on this range of mental health issues. In the question on the financial portion, do we dig any deeper and see if there was any of these other issues involved under the financial portion that may have led to cause a financial issue?
Short answer is no. Okay. I can give a longer answer. I mean, we can delve into it more, but the short answer is no. Next, you can see this gives the Monterey County breakdown by jurisdiction. What I want to point out is that overall, the census declined, where the census counted more people were in South County cities, the North County communities, Carlo and Prudell, and the city of Seaside, where they were increasing.
On the South County side, I believe it's actually because this time I was out there too, we actually counted. So I'm not too sure on those other numbers.
Yeah.
This time we were out there.
That and Supervisor Lopez pointed that out as well. And we appreciate that. Okay, and then we pull up the 701. And Tracy, I may need some chiming up if needed. Okay. So, and I'm not going to go through the full board.
May I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Going back to the change in count by jurisdiction, have we gone back to you know, I don't even know if this is possible, but you know how we use cars to kind of help prioritize where people get housed and where they come from? Some of these jurisdictions had significant shifts from 2 years ago. Have we gone back to kind of to analyze any data available to us first so that we can make some educated guesses as to why there's huge shifts? Obviously, we know in South County because in the past time, people just didn't go out there and count, and so obviously you would expect them to be a count now, but like Monterey decreasing 40%, some of the other jurisdictions going to 0.
You know, some of that, you know, I just tell you, will be hard because you have a very mobile population. And, you know, I've heard anecdotes from any number of public officials about other communities doing this, you know, this community. I personally would rather stay out of that conversation if I could, because, you know, I respect the, you know, how various cities work and how they respond to their constituents. What I do want to say is that some of the elements that struck me and that we put in our press release and presented to the board are the increase in general assistance was substantial. For a homeless individual, it went from $133 a month to $340 a month. There are 113 new, very affordable housing units created around the county. Whole-person care was initiated. And frankly, while people in shelters are still counted in the homeless count, having the year-round shelter and having shelter resources gives individuals a place where they can stabilize and are more likely to get back on their feet. And finally, I want to point out that the CARS program also came into being. And CARS prioritizes those with the highest acuity for housing. So those are the elements that, you know, as I kind of poked around, also to folks that I could talk to, made sense. And I think it's as much caution as I want to put on the census, and take lots of caution. There's lots of instability in the methodology. Anyone in this room could poke holes in it.
One more quick question here. Just in dealing with the sweeps and dealing with not having cars done, and where that you could usually count the numbers of people. In Salinas, how did you document that number? And if it shows a reduction, but there's a larger number now because of the sweeps and the impact and lack of cars. And when Cecil started to do cars with some of the people that I gave them, but I have a concern with the impact of the sweeps and all the other displaced people that weren't, that it doesn't show about based upon policies and the practices based upon sweeps in places like Salinas.
Just to say, that's not going to be an element of the homeless census. The homeless census is a visual count of homeless individuals on the morning of January 31st. So that's where instability comes from.
But the sweeps displaced people from one point in time and to the other. So at that point in time, it would appear to be different than that it is after the sweep is done.
Okay. Other questions? That was more of a comment. Other questions?
Before this meeting started, I talked to Mr. Robinson. We had a discussion. I mean, you've got volunteers out there. They're standing a block away and they're counting. How do you know that who's a veteran, who's gay, who's not gay, whether they lost their job, whether they're on drugs and alcohol, they're mentally ill? I mean, how often is the survey being done? I mean, if you're not physically up there, respectfully saying, I'm Doug, I have a name tag, I'd like to help you, can you tell me some information about you, what's going on? Like me, West Mike, we do this every day, right? But you're out there a block away with these volunteers, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's totally inaccurate, that's a farce. You have to do it the proper way. If you want transparency and accuracy numbers, then do the right thing, do it right. Don't stand a block away and say 1, 2, 3, 4. How do you know who's Afro-American, what nationality they are? If you're not identifying them verbally, you have to engage these people in a respectful manner. I mean, I'm disappointed about the drop in homeless census. Come on, you gotta be joking me. Me, West, we see these people, we see new people in the streets every single day that are hurting. How many people have died? I mean, come on, this census has gotta be accurate. We're talking about people's lives here. We're talking about human beings here. We're not talking about going to an ASPCA and counting how many animals you have in the shelter. It's got to be done the right way. How many people went out to Del Mar Forest and Pebble Beach in the woods?
Okay, Doug, I gotta let them.
I'm fed up, sir. I had enough of this nonsense about the low census of the homeless. It's just outrageous, you know?
And maybe, Ellie, you could distinguish how the county's done, because it's a HUD-accepted methodology, but also how does the other demographics get put into this kind of pit?
So just really briefly, the methodology for the survey is defined by HUD, right? The definition is within the last 10 days of January, pick one morning and do a visual count of homelessness. And that's where, I think everyone would have consensus that that's not the best, it's not going to count everyone, particularly for a population that often doesn't want to. For the more detailed analysis, so we can reach out to people and understand their experiences, we conduct a survey in partnership with our homeless provider network, who also has a relationship with homeless individuals, to reach out into the community, to get a random group of homeless individuals that reflects the community at large as counted through the census, to determine those more fine-tuned information, data points, with enough statistical accuracy that we can come to conclusions.
So when you do the point and count at time, that's not being done on those surveys that you just described. That's a separate process. But the point in time is just actual numbers is done visually. And the survey gets the racial or gender, sexual orientation, and demographic data.
And then my other question is, the school districts. How many school districts actually participate in this survey? How many? I'm hearing in the news reports, very few school districts wanted to participate in this survey. Very few.
So 10 of the 24 school districts participated. That represents about 2/3 of the student body in Monterey County.
And that's a significant increase from previous point in time.
There was one 2 years ago, but we also have 8 charter schools. So if you add that to the other districts.
Do they participate?
No.
You see, it's not accurate. The census is not accurate, guys. Let's be transparent here and be real.
All right.
Numbers.
Now we go to San Benito County.
So, let me just get by this. So, as you can see, the homeless trend in San Benito County, the count went from 2017 to 500, in 2017, 527 to 283 in 2019. In San Benito County, 40% of the population was sheltered, 60% was unsheltered. 44% of the population had been in San Benito County for 10 years or more, and 85% of the population was a San Benito County resident prior to becoming homeless. 40% of respondents indicated their current episode of homeless was their first. 13% responded that they had been in the foster care system at some point in the past. Age of 30, you can see the age of first episode of homelessness, 3% as youth, 12% 18 to 24, younger youth, 12% youth 18 to 24, and 85% 25 or longer. 12% of the respondents spent 1 or more nights in jail, prisons, and alcohol in the past year. Again, you can see 29% combinations on the night of the count. 29% were in emergency shelter, 22% were in tents, 12% outdoors, 10% were in hotels and motels paid for by a homeless program, 10% were in their vehicles, and 6% in encampments. The age of the homelessness, 15% were under 18, 1% were 18 to 24, and 84% were 25 or older. Primary condition or event that led to homelessness, 73% reported it was financial issues. Then other issues you're going to see include divorce, separation, breakup, light fight or conflict, legal issues, drug or alcohol abuse, mental health issues, or incarceration. You can also see the gender, 52% male, 47% female, 1% didn't identify, and then TQ status, 13% yes, 77% no. 40% of respondents indicated that this current episode was their first episode of homelessness. In terms of ways to obtain permanent housing, 84% reflected that rental assistance would be the most useful tool. 38% indicated job or more income, 14% money for living costs, 10% help finding apartment. The duration of the current episode of homelessness, 50% said was a year or more. You can see, again, the health conditions also appeared. 32% reflect depression, 70% other social, psychiatric, or emotional conditions. 79% of services reported receiving government benefits. And with that, that's San Benito. If there are more questions on San Benito, many of the answers are going to be very similar to the other.
Questions from those who have not asked questions or made comments so far?
Comments or questions?
Either.
I don't know. I do have one major concern, which is the future funding that we're looking at. This decline will result in about $1 million in loss of state funds. And I do have concerns because in looking at the data sets that we have in addition to this piece of data, they don't seem to align. So we're hearing from our public safety officers, for example, that there is an increase between 2017 and 2019 in homeless calls, in medical service calls, and fires, and things of that nature. We're looking at some of our data with cleanups and so forth, where we have counted encampments in numbers, and there's just, it seems to be a mismatch between these numbers and what we saw in terms of growth. At least I can speak for the city of Salinas. So the concern I have is I feel like having counts every other year and using this as our own methodology for data regarding homelessness is not good enough. And that we as a COC need to come together and think of other ways that we can do an annual count and look at other data so that we don't lose funding unless, you know, of course, if we did decline because we're more effective, great. But I'm not sure that that's the case. I'm thinking that some of the data is fallible, you know, not correct, and so we need to come together.
Thank you, Betty. But finally, one person in this room is telling the truth.
Excuse me, Doug, please respect the protocol. We got to be called on by the chair here for this meeting. Yeah. Other comments or questions? No, Mr. Doug, you spoke before. If you want to add some additional comments?
This is exactly what we're talking about. This lady over here said charter schools, not represented. Make it is right. If we don't do the count accurately, we're going to lose the funding for homeless and poor people in our community. This is a must. We're talking about people's lives here. We're not talking about animals. Making this right, this lady over here is right. The census has got to be redone and recertified. You can't go by what you're doing now. This is wrong. You've got to find a better way of doing things and taking care of people.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments, Elliot? But I did want to point out, though, that the one that is done every 2 years is the one that counts. So even if the COC did an additional count, we'd have to find a way to fund it. But technically, it would not count to change the numbers that will be used in the formula for state housing funding. And I think everybody in this room agrees, Doug, just that the system is not perfect. There's a lot of ways you could criticize it for a lot of imperfections, but unfortunately, for now, it's the HUD accepted methodology that every county has to follow, as imperfect as it is. But at the same time, if you look at the last 10 years, the last 5 pit counts, our numbers this year are almost the same they were 10 years ago, 2009. I think we're only off by 22. Our record count was 2 years ago. 2017 was a record count high in homelessness, and so even though we dropped to what our numbers were almost 10 years ago. So even when we released our numbers, we were not celebrating. We were very cautious, saying we're not celebrating, there's a drop. If you look at the next 10 years, and we have to look again what happens in 2 years. For me, there was nothing to celebrate. It reminded us there's still a lot of work to be done. And so for me, I try to convey publicly that it was more of a motivation to do work a lot harder. But luckily, we have some good projects coming along. We got some additional rounds of state funding coming along. But as the state commits to give more funding cycles to continuums of care and more funding to the county directly, we're also talking to state leaders to say that counties that are doing the right thing, if their numbers are dropping, there should be an incentive fund to make them whole, so they're not punished for doing the right thing. Otherwise, counties that are having a spike in homelessness, they're getting more funds, they're getting rewarded in terms of homelessness funding, and I think that's not the logic the governor or the legislators intended. But because these are the first 2 years of this type of significant funding, they still haven't figured it out. But I know I'm part of the State Association of Counties. I'm pushing that issue because I don't think we should lose out when we're doing the right thing. Yes, comment over here.
And just a question, like Mr. Elliott said, the County Vento census is different than state, so in the future for our Leadership Council, could we have some workshops on what census are and what the difference between that and the County Vento model is versus the HUD model, and then we'll know the difference, and then those that are participating in going out to do those visuals would be able to understand the process more.
Yes.
For all the comments, kind of good, better, and different, I think what it tells me is the importance of getting volunteers to participate in the homeless census, and obviously to get partners also to participate. And it takes a community to do that. It's not the Coalition of Homeless Services Providers. It's not the County of Monterey. It's not the County of San Benito. It's not our city partners. It's the community as a whole. And your participation in the census will bring out as many of the genuinely comfortable homeless as possible. Granted, you have to wake up at 4 in the morning or earlier, and you have to be willing to go out into communities in the very early morning hours. But your participation, the participation of those you know, is absolutely essential.
Yes.
Somebody help me remind, did we give any incentives to the volunteers? I mean, you're talking about volunteers, that's great. But to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm hearing
only to the homeless guys. But the actual volunteers come out in donuts.
And to do the surveys as well. There's an incentive as well.
And I think they potentially plan to have the guides go to those precincts that had probably the more complex needs for the count. So like in Chinatown, the guides definitely went there. I went over here to Santa Rita area, and it was, trust me, I tried around trying to find as many people as I could, but it rained the night before, right? So it was wet. A lot of people find it's not your typical night out. So there's a lot of those factors could make a big difference in terms of doing that count on that particular morning. Anything else, anybody? Okay. Sorry we couldn't bring this before it became public, but once we agendized it, the press covered it quickly. But we're glad to have this conversation today. Okay, we got a couple more items. A continuum of care organizational chart discussion.
So, at our last meeting, we had a conversation on the continuum of care governance structure. And a lot of people, what I've noticed since I've stepped into this role, is that a lot of people are a little bit confused. What's the Coalition of Homeless Services? What's the Leadership Council? Where's the City of Salinas in all of this? And so I did my best to draw it graphically. I don't mean it to, look at it now and it's like, oh, that's a little bit confusing. I didn't quite mean it. Big circle is the community, right? I have a smaller circle kind of off the side just to say who the homeless services providers are, that they're a subset of the community. On the left is the Coalition of Homeless Services Providers, and that has its own board of directors. Robin, there are a few providers who are on the board here, Robin, Kirk, missing others. Dana, I think she's on the board of directors. So that, and the coalition's role is, you know, it has a number of roles, right? It has provider coordination, it has training, it has advocacy, but it's also the Continuum of Care administrative entity. So within the Continuum of Care circle, or outline, are the Continuum of Care administration, HMIS, coordinated entry, the HUD Continuum of Care application, and HEAP are functions that are under the oversight of this board, which is the Leadership Council. Likewise, City of Salinas has a whole host of things they do, right? I'm not going to get into everything that City does. But they also manage the state entitlement ESG, the state ESG, and CESH, which have to integrate into the Continuum of Care. So that's why when the City of Salinas has their funding recommendations, they bring them here for your review and approval. And same thing with the coalition, with the Continuum of Care recommendations and the HEAP recommendations. We also need to work a little bit more in the future on getting our policies straight for the Continuum of Care, how things are operating. So that's why we brought to you the 3 new policies for Continuum of Care, because you're the approval body for those kinds of activities. In the past, there are committees that, under the Continuum of Care, that the coalition manages. And we've traditionally reported the outcomes and minutes of those meetings to the coalition board. As I sit here, I think, well, those minutes should really come here, hopefully as consent items, but your board needs to also kind of keep in track of what are we doing as a continuum, with the continuum as a whole. So that's, I hope that kind of describes the structure a little bit. I've also attached in the agenda packet, you can see from HUD, all the definitional points of what is a continuum of care. And I hope that it brings kind of relevance to you. Say, oh, that is what we're doing. And that's what this body is, the oversight body for the continuum of care. Kind of your authority in terms of administrators, and would not be crushed if you said, you know, let's get another administrator, because I think the coalition can be extraordinarily facile as a nonprofit and work quicker than I've seen a lot of public sector agencies doing. I'm a big public sector fan. They haven't been there for 17 years, but it's very valuable to have the nonprofit structure be able to manage the resources and manage the processes in a relatively efficient way. That, are there questions?
Questions on it? Yes, thank you, Elliot. I really like this. It does help start clarifying where everything's at. The only thing I would ask for consideration is under the Leadership Council, when it goes over to the Coalition of Homeless Services, that portion of the box on the right side of the dotted line. So, is that we should be evaluating the outcomes of all programs, looking at the dollars that are spent, what are we getting from it. We may not be making decisions on that because that would be under the coalition's purview, but I would love to see the Leadership Council also be evaluating the programs in place. So one is, if we don't think something's working, we can talk about that. We can ask why. If it's a funding reason or if the funding's not going to the right place. So I would put that in that one box. Evaluation of programs and finances.
I think that would be valuable to take that on. And certainly that's something that we're putting in place the infrastructure to do that for the coalition side of the equation. How our programs are operating. I believe City of Salinas is doing that for their program, and that is something that would be absolutely appropriate for the Leadership Council to ask, you know, all the entities, you know, which is one is the city and the coalition, to really present how the outcomes are working and how they're working together. That would be an appropriate request from the Leadership Council.
Thank you.
I don't know that we'd be ready to do that on time, but we certainly can get there.
But certainly, I think there's areas to improve our oversight of this board. It's been one of the criticisms of our effectiveness as a board, too, making progress on addressing homelessness. Other comments or questions on this? Yes, ma'am?
Especially dealing with the culture, ethnicity, basically to be able to measure and evaluate there has to be oversight and being able to have that expertise and that protocol and that operation of where we are from where we started with the Leave Me Home plan, and now that we have the updated Leave Me Home plan, how are we, the efforts to outcome actually working, and so thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Megan?
Yeah, I think one thing that would be interesting as we're moving forward is looking at how we can integrate entitlement jurisdictions into kind of the look, because even though they don't necessarily have to get leadership council approval for how they use their funds, what's great, with the cash opportunities, how we can leverage a whole person care. And so looking across the region, how we can leverage, city funds as well as these funds together to maybe make these programs more robust, and then really look at outcomes that I think would be really interesting and helpful.
Just to comment a little bit, I think that was part of the goal of having the restructured leadership council, that we could get to that point, so I very much
Anyone else? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm curious, I wish there was a piece in the structure about the sweeps and what people left outside of these programs have to endure. I think there should be a branch of the remainder 90%, 95% of people who are not within a program.
Okay, I'm going to move on now to our last item, HEAP and CHSP update.
So, just really quickly on HEAP, we only have 2 contracts left to get through. Lauren and I talked about those this morning. Hopefully we'll get the 2 contracts done quickly. Every other contract is executed as of yesterday. For most contractors, or for all contractors, we've been clear that we can, to the extent that expenses have been incurred, we're going back to July as the start date of the contract, so we have authority from the state to do that. So that, hopefully kind of decreases anxiety in terms of projects that really do need to get started, getting started. With the county there, I think there are just a few loose ends in the contract language that we need to tie down. We're still awaiting the state's template on what they need for reporting. They sent out a draft of what kind of report items they want. It makes it a little bit confusing to have the contracts written but not knowing the reports. I am pleased I got clarification that we could our subrecipients could actually spend all the way to the end of June 30, 2021. It's not when the coalition has to spend it down the funds, it's when our subrecipients have to spend it down the funds. But that June 30, 2021 date is very important, and it's very important for our subrecipients to actually utilize the money. That's one of the things that I think the state will be looking at, and I suspect that the community will be looking at as well. In terms of the coalition, I'm pleased that we have hired our contracts and compliance manager, Nicole Sakikara. She's here. I think if I recall the coalition status right when we came into the HEAP conversation, it was a sum total of 2 staff at the time? No, 3 staff at the time, right?
There's 3. I was out.
Okay. And I also got approval from the coalition board to hire an additional person to help us, one, so that we don't kind of drown our staff like we've been doing for the last year, to kind of divide up some workload, but also what I want to do is use the whole team so that we can start working a little bit more on deeper analytics of what's happening, and maybe analytics that can be presented to the community as well so that they can better understand what's going on. So hopefully the next person will start, I think, if I remember right, a week from Monday. So we will have a larger contingent, and I think that's all I have.
All right. Also, just want to give an update on our homeless shelters. As last meeting we funded both the Seaside and Salinas shelter, but there was a lawsuit filed by the local attorney, Michael Pecking. But the arguments were not your typical, what I thought were typical challenges to a homeless shelter. Usually CEQA, environmental review. These are some, in my opinion, odd arguments being made about public waste, and not agendizing an item he wanted, so, and he hasn't filed any motions to try to seek an injunction to try to put an immediate stop. The county board of supervisors did vote to approve putting our project for the Salinas, project between the city and the county, for the Salinas shuttle, to put it out for an RFP, and we're trying to move expeditiously to try to get that out and hopefully underway very soon. Yes, sir.
On the HEAP funding, I would ask that we, for all the recipients of that funding, we get quarterly reports on their expenditures. So we're well aware before we get to that time, maybe something's really going to come off.
Yes.
Yeah, they were supposed to be doing that.
Oh, okay.
Well, actually, I mean, my anticipation is that we'll get, if I remember the contracts right, I mean, Nicole, on your second day, you can remind me. I think we asked for monthly.
Oh, okay, awesome.
I did, there's one other thing I forgot to mention. We will be also working in the next year with Home Base to actually review and update all our COC policies so that they are current and that they reflect our community's needs. I would put the caveat on that it has to be doable. Sometimes we create policies that just sound wonderful but are stretched to do. So we want to keep it practical, doable, and within the kind of scope of what's required for community care as we work with both out in the state. Okay. How we start in the next week.
Other questions, comments on this? All right. Last comment?
Just for the efforts to outcome, not just how we spend the money, but what we do differently. If you can also put the reports to show efforts to outcome by each of the recipient awardees. So that we can actually end homelessness with our new timeline and updated legal.
Okay. All right. It's 3:02. This meeting's adjourned. Thank you.